You ask, is non-reaction or even self-observation a form of purification? How does one truly purify the nous, psyche? This is certainly a very interesting question because it brings together two seemingly different ideas: self-observation, attention, will, intentionality, focus, knowledge, with that high spiritual term, purification. And one can say that this is indeed what is really going on. It is certainly a key part of the process. As we know in self-observation, the idea is to do it with no judgment, objectively, just seeing. At the beginning, not even trying to step in and change things, getting information, getting data on oneself, for the purpose then of a future step to be change. As Maurice Nicole says, how can you change if you remain the same? And it is that change, that move out of our mechanical and dysfunctional behavior, which is going to generate purification, which will be the real beginning of cleansing the inside of the cup. But we cannot cleanse it without knowing what it is we're cleansing or why. For instance, growing up in this hypnotized culture, anger is not really too much of a problem if it is relatively under control. It is often a form of assumed strength, even leadership, God forbid. Masculinity sometimes, which is all the more twisted. But all of our models in the movies and the culture and the news function out of it. And to begin to see it from a new perspective releases us from the lie, from the justification, from the familiarity, from the imitation of our father, mother, peers. And we begin to see what it is, rooted in violence, toxic to ourselves and others, to the universe, low energy, dark energy, heavy energy that keeps us from our aim, if this is our aim, to awaken, to come closer to something pure, holy, good, authentic. As we begin to see, for instance, that our particular brand of negativity, of irritation, in observing it, reminds us of a parent. Suddenly, in that moment, it is no longer an identity. It is a assumed habit, a reflection, an echo, a ghost within us of somebody else's dysfunction and the dysfunction that came before them. And we begin to see how indeed we are captive in a dungeon. So one can say on some level that self-observation, is the beginning of purification. But since its original, and for a time, perhaps a long time, its purpose is for us to see, to begin to connect knowledge with what we're seeing, to see what inner considering is, to see how we are so impacted by our fear, our concern, our embarrassment of what others think, to recognize the lack of freedom there, to see that perhaps once upon a time we were not like that. We were these children who could just be, who could be themselves without bumping into others' opinions, until eventually, at a certain age, that begins to change. This purification is a mighty transformation. It realigns neurologically our way of being in the moment, in every moment. It releases us from dangerous habits and addictions to behaviors and attitudes. We no longer eventually indulge in depression, worry, imagination of what's going to happen if. We begin to realize that returning to a place within that is peaceful, silent, present, we can taste how this energy of ours that we have available to live this day is being wasted, lost, not ever to return to us, until we regenerate a little more and then waste that in the leakage of these habits of sleep, habits of mechanics, and most often obscenely petty and selfish habits. We are headed towards a purification that is an avenue for self-sacrificial love, which is agape love, which is coming closer to the nature of the divine, which is the way home to the heart of God, to our higher self, to our spiritual being, which alive and well and present to our existence, freed from these barnacles of dysfunction, may consciously live beyond the grave. This is how important this is. If we function in any old way, chaotically, without this kind of discipline, which this particular work gives us with such precision, other traditions provide it through other means, such as in the religious realm, the devotion, the submission of one's will in monasteries, the struggle with thoughts is another path, but it is not as direct, as clear as in the midst of our reality, where we cannot run away from life as it is. And this is, once again, the genius of this work. Right in the middle of the pots and pans, as Brother Lawrence said, in the practice of the presence of God. He was the same whether it was in the noise of the kitchen of a big monastery or in silence on his knees at the altar in the chapel. This is where we're headed. This is self-remembering. This is higher consciousness. This is inner tranquility, Hezekiah, the inner castle. And though self-observation is not in itself purification, because we are looking at what is not pure, narcissism, old habits, unredeemed, thoughtless, hypnotized, not ours. Nevertheless, it will allow for eventual purification. And that purification will come when, in a moment, we are present enough, our will is there, our remembering of what we are seeking is present, and we make a different choice. We have a moment of freedom in our psyche. That is a breakthrough. That is the beginning of purification. You mentioned the nous, that mysterious Greek word referencing the heart of the soul, the eye of the soul, a way of knowing, intuitive and profound, that is deeper within us. It is not for us to purify that. It is already purified. It is for us to clear the brush so that it can emerge within us, rising up to higher levels within us, so that reaching the intellectual part of the emotional center, the knowing part of emotions, the refined energy of emotion, instead of the emotional part of the emotional center, the Queen of Hearts, raging, loose cannon, pendulum swing back and forth, or the instinctive part of the emotional center, just having a good time with the guys or something of that nature. That more quiet place that we have access to. Gateway to higher centers, it's called. Enables the nous to come forth. Intuitive knowing, symbolic perception, that is to say, seeing living symbolism in the reality around us, seeing the messages, hearing that famous still small voice of spirit, which our dysfunction does not allow us to hear, unless it crashes through us as it did for St. Paul on the road to Damascus. So this is why self-observation is no simple matter. It is, in fact, the takeoff point to authentic transformation. If one wonders why people who, in an Orthodox church, for instance, go through remarkable discipline, say their prayers for 15 minutes each morning and each evening, stand for hours, a version of Christianity unknown to much of the West, why these people are not changing, are not awakening. Certainly they're getting something. They're going to that sanctuary, remembering the Spirit, but remaining mechanical, without a clue as to how to overcome inner considering. Perhaps vanity can be overcome a bit, hearing about humility, prostrating oneself, hearing the teachings of St. John Climacus in the church. But the real work requires that brutally honest awareness of self. Another aspect of this purification is inner silence. which implies separating from the noise in our head, from the multiplicity of thoughts and feelings that flood our psyche continuously. To separate out, to not let that noise claim our identity, each passing I, is also a beginning point of quieting, stabilizing, enabling a space to be created within that before was not there, except in rare contemplative moments perhaps, or in powerful moments of suffering or joy, in which we enter that higher consciousness of self-remembering as it is expressed, a word that doesn't really do it justice. Higher awareness, sense of relationship to life, gratitude for being. We have those moments in our life enough to remember what it is we're after. But until we find work like this, esoteric teaching like this, we cannot value what this means, that this is how we should be living. Now we have tools in these ideas, maps, flashlights to turn on within us through that observing eye and to see what is happening. And slowly but surely choose not to be a victim of ourselves, our mechanical psyche, who we've always thought we were. Dare to enter the unknown of another kind of self that is more serene, more wise, not reactive. That alone, not reacting, not being stimulus response, is a nuclear tool for transformation, initiated with self-observation. So as I have said in the past, that simple term of putting our awareness within, dividing our attention, seeing what's going on within us while dealing with the world, is an initiatory movement within, as wondrous and mysterious as all that is claimed in other circles of exotic wisdom teachings. But it is more real because it is intimate and personal, individual, ours to wrestle with, to overcome, to recognize, and finally to empower us. Yes, the very dysfunction we see, in our choice to change, we become empowered. To live differently in each moment, in each ordinary thing, one event, one situation, one breath at a time. And then we become accessible, available to higher forces, to something greater than us that will come and help us to go higher into places we have yet to discover, the undiscovered country. And it all begins indeed with that discipline, that effort, that remembering of self-observation. May you discover its true power. May you find the purification that it leads to. You ask specifically about non-reaction, which comes after self-observation because it implies a capacity to use that willpower, which Gurdjieff tells us we don't have. We have some minimal kind of will to meet our desires, our aims in the mechanical world, that is to say, according to a certain level of consciousness. But the will to consciously, intentionally, not react as we always have, is already manifestation of a new will. And indeed, that new will is a purification metric, if you will. We have begun to rise up out of the fog, the haze, the swamp of a life lived in distraction, fragmentation, chaos, confusion. Non-reaction means we are no longer simply stimulus-response mechanisms, machines, as he calls us. And you can see how already that is a quantum leap from a modern understanding. Just the idea to think of ourselves as machines is foreign in most disciplines of psychology or philosophy. So already we are dealing with new territory, new understanding, new perspectives that will lead us to new places unknown to the world. Perhaps it is found with different language, different experiences on some level. But in this discipline of the so-called fourth way, in these ideas, we can trace a path up the mountain, and the top of that mountain is non-reaction, choice, will, intention, consciousness. So most definitely, to be able to not react as we always have is the development of an inner muscle of conscious presence that carries the promise of great things to come as we evolve with the help of grace, with the help of guidance, with the right use of the gifts we have been given.